may know Valerie Hare from the Shape of Enrichment, but I think some of you, those of you who don't, I hope you get to know her. She's fabulous and wonderful and lots of fun. So this is not a Margaret Whitaker lecture. Most of them aren't anyway. They're bits I steal from other brilliant people. But this is an actual Shape of Enrichment workshop. So I hope everybody's familiar with the wonderful publication Shape of Enrichment, or just Shape. And Valerie was one of the two originators of that journal. And
the organization started in 91, we went nonprofit in 96, first publication in 92.
So it's been around a while.
You know what, as far as I know to date, we're still the only organization that is just enrichment.
Yeah. So we thought it would be a nice idea to really focus some of our behavior management brain on just enrichment for this workshop. Normally this is a 5-day workshop that focuses just on enrichment. And when we do it at an institution, you know, like the Oakland Zoo or any other institution, we can do it a couple of different ways. We may have just that facility like we're doing here. We may do it where we invite people from other facilities. But typically it's done in a 5-day period, and it's all about enrichment. But because Val has just, well, within the last few years, moved to San Jose, we have the luxury to kind of spread this out over really the next year and a half and do lots more than would normally be done in a 5-day workshop. So mark your calendar every day for the next year and a half.
Let us know.
So what we're going to do is keep the lecture times to 2 to 3 hours, and that way it won't have a significant impact, hopefully, a negatively significant impact on your day. So we're trying to get as many people to come to the lecture-y parts of the workshop, and then over really next year, we're going to get out in the animal areas and do enrichment projects where we're brainstorming and developing and building and implementing and assessing these wonderful enrichment strategies that we've come up with. So the next 2 days, we're going to focus on animal welfare. Today's going to be more lecture-y, PowerPoint-y. Tomorrow we're going to have an activity. Depending on how much of the lecture we get through today, we may push a little bit of it to tomorrow, but we'll just kind of see how it goes. We want to have the opportunity for discussion, and so we don't want to be so set on, we have to get through all this today, that we cut off good discussion. So that's the plan for the next couple of days. And then when we come back in November, we will do kind of an enrichment 101, planning, basics of enrichment. And I know a lot of you are doing really great enrichment, and you may think, oh, I already know all of this, but it's really important foundational information, and all of the lectures build on each other. And it is important that as many of you as can come to the lectures so that you have all of that information to go forward and do the fun, practical kinds of stuff. So we're going to have 3 days, I think it is, on enrichment, different aspects of enrichment. And then another visit that I won't participate in, but Valerie will come back and do, is data collection. And again, there's a lot of data collection that happens here in the zoo, but you know, when we were discussing with the managers about how much of it, you know, all of y'all are actually involved in, there may be varying levels. And so we thought it would be a good idea to go ahead and expose you to various data collection techniques and give you the opportunity to practice those so that you either can do more of it or at least have a better understanding of what the bots are doing, or when you are exposed to different papers or research projects, you have a better understanding of it. And what have I left out? Are those the lecture things?
I think that's all of them, yeah.
Yeah.
And both of those next, the November and the data collection one, both have some bits of activities in them too. They're not all sitting in this room. Most of them they are.
And then going into, do you want to describe the project stuff?
Okay, so we haven't actually sorted out the projects that we're going to do here yet because of a lot of things, mostly because I haven't been in the country, I guess. But I'm back. And I know that Darren wants to take me up to see the new construction stuff, so I know that's a focus area that we want to pay attention to. But in general, what we do is once we have the lectures about enrichment, it goes through the planning process, which several of you have been in our Tuesday workshops, so you should be familiar with it. Then we actually do our group projects. We push you in small groups and give you an enclosure and a goal and go to it and do the entire process from brainstorming all the way around to doing something, getting it approved, watching it and assessing it and giving a report. Okay. And that's the fun bit. That's what I live for. So I don't like to be in the room either. And so because we can do this over a long period of time, we have a lot of options that we'll talk with the managers. I mean, maybe we'll want to do one really big project. Maybe one of those projects we'll want to have be a big thing where, I don't know, build a climbing structure or something. Maybe we'll want to do some pre-approved projects that are just ideas that we've done over the years that take a couple hours to build and they'll get approved all in advance and they're fun, I don't know, giraffe tongue feeder or something, you know, and we'll do some of those. Because usually in our workshops we're restricted to very simple, adding substrates, simple feeders, for two reasons. One is we have a lot of time or money available to us, and two, the zoos that I work in usually are never going to have time or money. Okay, people in the States I only get to work in the States about once a year if I'm lucky, the first thing I hear is, "You don't have a budget. It's $300. It's $5,000." So I'm like, right. So for our workshops, lots of times we go for a walk around the zoo, pick up stuff, and that's our budget. Okay, it's the pine cone I just picked up or the grass I just cut, you know. So there's a lot you can do, but because you guys do have some money and you do have the resources and you do have the expertise, we can do more if that's what you guys decide. Is that what you think?
So I guess going for, is there any other introduction stuff that you want to say?
Questions?
So yeah, so we just want to make sure that you sort of understand what we're doing going forward, and if, yeah, does anyone have any questions about that, or?
Actually, I'm sorry, I did think of something. So it occurred guys, just a little bit earlier when I got here, that because Margaret works, I don't even understand what Margaret does here. But you all know Margaret because of not shape stuff. Margaret is actually a shape event workshop enrichment instructor, okay? So this is a shape event that's being run with two shape instructors. The fact that you happen to know one of them very well is immaterial. Okay? Okay.
Yeah, so we're following the shape format at workshops.
You now
So
see the shape of enrichment hat on your
I
head.
have. I have one. I didn't bring it. It's hanging on my shelf in that other place where I spend time. Okay. Any questions then, or shall we just get going?
Carry on.
All right.
Can I just say, I'm going to be sitting here frantically poking at the computer because I found out about an hour ago that we don't have a VGA connector that my computer's happy with, so I'm moving my entire talk and the 47 videos or whatever over to Margaret's computer while she's talking. So
that'll be happening. Yeah.
So that's what I'm
So
doing.
can somebody flip the lights just so it's a little bit easier? I'm going to try to not stand. Maybe just once off. If you feel enriched. Seizure. It's a fine line between seizure and enrichment. Okay, so we're talking about animal welfare, and just out of curiosity, how many of you were here for the presentation I did on animal welfare? Maybe a year and a half ago? I can't remember exactly when it was. Okay, so good. A lot of you actually weren't. That's good, because some of it is redundant. Some of it will be different material for you. So I think, you know, we all want to keep animals in a manner that we're relatively convinced they have good welfare. So I think superior animal welfare really is a guiding principle for how we manage and take care of animals. And we always want to think about it and try to keep it at the forefront of our husbandry and management approaches. And I know I've shown you this quote, but I think it's, again, a really good reminder to us and maybe where we want to start off our animal welfare thinking. So before going any further and telling you this, does everybody have your Post-it notes? I want you to write down what you think animal welfare is on your Post-it note and just stick it somewhere on the wall. And make sure that you recognize it's yours, because you're going to write down what your perceptions of animal welfare are now and what your perceptions of animal welfare are later.
You got a couple, Lindsay?
20 words or less.
Does somebody else, do you need Post-its? I know, pen. Oh, here you go.
Anybody else need a pen?
Hello.
You can write down a formal definition, you can write down bullet points, things that you think are important to good or poor welfare, however you want to do it, just so you get kind of a mental picture. That's right. When you're finished, if you're lucky enough to be close to a wall, feel free to slap it behind you, or get up and slap it on the wall, and then we'll move on when everybody's done.
Yeah, those.
I'll leave them there. For my table. Anybody still need a handout? Don't worry, you'll get another one, a more updated version. Is anybody still writing? As fine as you are.
Sorry, I'm gonna need new Post-its.
You can have
You're gonna
two
need a
if
whole
you want.
bunch.
Or three.
Two's okay.
Okay.
We'll see how many I need.
Is anybody still writing? I can't see if you are. It's fine. Is everybody done? Okay. All right. Well, here's a couple of definitions of animal welfare that people who are way smarter than me came up with. So can everybody read this, or do you want me to read it out loud?
Please read it out loud.
Okay. The degree to which an animal copes with challenges in its environment as determined by a combination of veterinary health measures and measures of psychological well-being. Okay. The second one is the state of the animal as it seeks to cope with its environment. The environment presents challenges, and the animal responds to reduce or cope with the challenge. So what do you notice as a common thread?
Coping.
Challenges, environment, and coping, right? And so, I mean, I think, as you start to look at this, you kind of think, what does that mean for an animal to cope in its environment? Think about that. We all know that we're presented with challenges in our environment. It's not always sunshine and bunny rabbits, sometimes there's going to be a lightning bolt, whatever it might be. There's going to be some challenge to the environment. And so how we cope with those challenges may indicate how we're dealing with life. If we have good welfare, if we can deal with challenges in our environment. So healthy coping leads to good welfare. Unhealthy coping, meaning we can't tolerate the challenges within our environment, may very well lead to unhealthy, abnormal, unnatural types of behaviors that we think are often indicative of poor well-being. So this little monkey, he was actually, Val and I were in Vietnam together teaching a workshop, and this monkey was at a so-called sanctuary or rescue center. And I will tell you, this animal was not coping with the environment. He spent considerable amount of time engaged in this very abnormal behavior. So when we have animals who can't deal with their situation, whatever their situation is, they may develop stereotypic behavior, they may have self-directed behavior, they may have excessive fear or hiding, because they just feel like they have to go away, and they may be very introverted, or any other number of abnormal, undesirable types of behaviors. It's just another situation where Val and I work together quite a bit in other countries, and sometimes you get to see some ugly things. So this is a group of hyenas. This was in China. And you can see the animals, so quite a number of animals in a very small, very sterile enclosure. And you see this pacing, head rolling, head toss behavior.
Is this long enough that you can see when somebody gets in the way? So that's what's fascinating to me. If you watch that one in the back, it's Vietnam, by the way.
It was Vietnam? I don't know if it was China.
That's because you always keep thinking I go to China a lot with you, and yeah.
Apparently we've never been to China together. And I keep thinking we have. We have. How are you doing?
I think go once, so we can see anymore.
All right. Are you going to say something?
There, right there. See, so even as she goes around, even when somebody else is in the way, she's so hardwired, she can't cope with it. Just watch what she does. Yeah, and all that goes on, and then she remembers, I gotta do this here. Okay, that's about the worst I've seen. Carnivore, anyway.
Do you ever think that maybe there's like some animals that can't cope with captivity? Just like an individual or a species that's just like, they can't do it?
So is anybody familiar with Georgia Mason's work? She's quite a brilliant welfare scientist. She was in the UK, now she's up in Canada, and she, I think, has been one of the first people to actually put in writing and say, perhaps there are just some species that are ill-suited for captivity. They just can't adapt. And so, yeah, I think, maybe there's some individuals, maybe there are some species that are really difficult to give them a good quality of life and, give them an environment where they can have good welfare. I think it's an excellent question to ask.
Yeah, and that's one of the ethics issues that's constantly under discussion, in zoo organizations around the world, frankly, is, what level of care do we need to give them in order for us to be able to justify even having them?
And it's good that we're constantly asking ourselves those questions because, You know, the Oakland Zoo sits pretty with a lot of animal protection groups because of the high level of concern for animal welfare. But if we're not examining what we do, somebody else is going to. So the more proactive we can be and the more critical we can be of ourselves, the better position we are to take good care of the animals. Another example, this is a self-directed behavior, an elephant who's doing this ear grabbing. You know, some of these self-directed behaviors, they can be injurious. An animal may actually cause physical harm to themselves. They may be a self-directed behavior such as clasping or grabbing themselves. So all self-directed behaviors are not necessarily injurious, but in any case, this is a self-directed abnormal behavior wherein this elephant grabs her ear, she'll twist her ear, she'll actually break down the cartilage, so there is some injurious aspect of it. And then she'll often move into this posture that you see here and kick her back feet. So there's all kinds of abnormal behaviors that are going on here. That foot grabbing and kicking, the ear grabbing, the weird stance posture she gets in. Okay, so we think of these types of things as animals who perhaps have diminished welfare, they're not coping with their environment. So when we think about how to manage, keep stepping in front of you, how to manage, okay, how to manage for optimal welfare, you know, we want to think about what does the animal experience, how do they deal with it. We want them to, we don't want to give them everything on a silver platter because we need them to be motivated to engage in natural behaviors. So we have to provide them the opportunity and the motivation to want to do these behaviors, you know, survival types of behaviors. So we want to manage for their behavioral health, their physical health, and their mental health. How are you doing now?
How am I doing?
Because we're, you know, moving into where we have to treat.
We're gonna have to take a break and see if it works.
Okay. Are you going to be, should I stretch it out?
No.
Like I'm doing right now?
Do a nice little dance though.
Oh, no, I really don't. Okay, so in considering how we manage an animal's mental health, what are the things that kind of come to mind for you? What do you do when you say, oh, I want to make this animal mentally more healthy?
Training and enrichment.
A little more specific.
Problem challenge their brain.
How? Who said that?
We'll talk at the same time.
Problem
Specific
solving,
things.
like
Specific things.
solving problems to get food.
Puzzle feeders?
Yeah. Puzzle, oops, that was, oh, you're taking that. Okay, yes, puzzle feeders. Pretty straightforward thing that we often think about. Training. Something that we think about. Is all training mentally challenging? When is it mentally challenging and maybe when is it less so?
Training new behaviors,
Is mentally challenging? Right, because you're problem solving, you're learning, you're thinking. Amber's got her hand way up high.
I did, but I talk a lot. When you're training more passive defense things, I've had the thought working with the zebras that the blood draw isn't very mentally stimulating. Stand there and eat food while we do things to you.
You don't think it's mentally stimulating?
I don't think it's as mentally
Oh,
stimulating.
okay, okay.
I think it's on the lower end of the spectrum.
Tolerate.
What if, that's an interesting thing you raised there. What if the animal is quite fearful of what you're doing and you're desensitizing it? Is that
Stimulating
mentally
in a different
challenging?
way.
I mean, is fear mentally challenging?
Yeah, I think that the example she showed the zebra, I think that once they get comfortable and they're desensed to a step, now it's probably fairly boring because it is passive.
It's more
But
routine.
each time we progress into a new scary step, it becomes challenging again. So I think it's more generally when it's new or scary because it's new, it's probably still provoking. But once it's easy, it's not
Right.
mentally stimulating anymore.
Yeah, so still that same idea that established behaviors are not as stimulating mentally.
I was thinking about with our warthogs, you know, previously, like with our old group, it was
don't change anything, everything's scary. And, you know, you start early and kind of go, hey, so we're gonna shift you out this different door, or you're gonna be over here, we're gonna separate you, and it's okay. And it's kind of letting them have control, but also helping them learn that just because something's different, it's okay and you're safe. And so like building that foundation of
And I think that
changing the
really
patterns
gets
that they made.
into, as far as coping skills go, you know, life is not static. So when we create an environment that's very dynamic and the animal just learns to live and thrive in that environment, and novelty happens. Ooh, we should make a bumper sticker. Novelty should happen. I mean, life is not the same thing every single day. And if it is the same thing every single day and then there's a change, that's when animals go, ah, and they can't handle the change. So they're not coping well. But the wild is dynamic and they're facing challenges and different things every single day. So you build that in, like you said, you build that into the husbandry and management. And then these become much more behaviorally flexible individuals that can handle that kind of novelty and change. Yes, mental stimulation. All right, behavioral health. What kinds of things do you think about when you want to give an animal good behavioral health? Social groupings. So they know how to socialize properly. They're not hyper-aggressive or hyper-submissive.
One species specific social settings, depending on you don't want to have 42 tigers together. First race, which is a normal, you know, solitary animal versus an animal like a goat, who you want to have 42 of them together.
So keeping appropriate social groupings.
Appropriate social groupings.
Appropriate exhibit.
Allowing natural behaviors.
Yeah. A what?
Allowing natural behaviors.
Mm-hmm. And how about a breadth of natural behaviors? You know, we want animals to have the fullest repertoire that they can. So not just, oh, that's a natural behavior, yay, there's one. You know, we want them to do many different types of natural behaviors. Okay, yeah, those, oh.
I just want to add to that, that I think the other important thing is that the actual activity budget is as typical for the species in the wild as possible. Because if they just spend, you know, a very small amount of time in an activity that they normally spend a very large amount of time in, then you're also not achieving your behavioral goals.
Right, absolutely, yeah. Those things, yeah. We did a lot of those. And, oh, cultural transmission for those social animals. You know, we want them to have the opportunity to socially learn from each other and maybe pass down some cultural behaviors. Maybe. Unless it's a naughty. Here's how we get out, guys. It's okay. And of course, from a kind of assessing, we often will look for the presence or absence of abnormal behaviors.
Yep,
Okay.
there's, yeah, whenever you want, we'll try it.
Okay. We have a couple more. So when we think about these abnormal behaviors, we may want to look for self-directed behaviors, things that I mentioned, they might be self-clasping, or, you know, an animal who is over-grooming if they're excessively over-grooming themselves, things like that. There can be self-injurious behaviors where animals are actually causing harm to themselves. There may be injurious behaviors to others. Again, it could be something like over-grooming. There may be an abnormal level of aggression, or even on the other side of aggression would be hyper-submission, so animals who are, again, socially incompetent and quite abnormal.
Barbara, can you clarify what barbering is?
Oh,
It's kind of,
plucking.
okay, what it sounds like.
Yes, thank you, sorry. Some of the language, you know, depending on the literature that you reference, you may find different language that refers to auto-grooming or grooming another. Barbering, over-plucking, alopecia, when you get hair loss, from overcrowding?
Barbering tends to be used primarily for mammals.
That's what I was
and
thinking, you're like
plucking
looking
tends
and
to be-
barbering there, I was wondering if there's something different.
Plucking is usually the only thing they use for birds. Plucking, what were we talking about, picking and breaking feathers. So it's just a terminology thing to make sure that you see any of those, you kind of know what it is.
And just on a note, when we think about aggression, I guess it is good to consider the type of aggression. Is it resource related? Is it seasonal? Is it normal for that animal? You know, maybe you're perceiving something as abnormal, but perhaps it's normal for that animal in their developmental stage. So you want to make sure that you really are looking at an abnormal behavior. And, you know, when we go to our realm of abnormal behaviors, of course, I think we often think of these things called stereotypic behaviors or stereotypies. So what are they? They're repetitive, they're invariant, and some definitions say that they serve no apparent function. But I guess I always would question, why would an animal do it if it's not serving a function to that animal? Now,
I believe the reason it's worded that way is because it does serve a function, of course, which is where she's going. This is to differentiate sort of no normal function within their behavioral repertoire, their natural behavioral repertoire. Is that a better way to say it?
Yeah. It is where I thought. But of course, these types of behaviors often result from an inappropriate animal-environment interaction. So perhaps there's too much of something or not enough of something in the animal's environment, so they develop these abnormal repetitive behaviors to compensate. Or they may have CNS, central nervous system. They may have some dysfunction, some actual physiological dysfunction that could be developmental from the environment. You know, if the brain doesn't have the opportunity to develop properly, there may be some aspects of that animal's behavior that they simply can't help. Now it is a function of anatomy. And fortunately, you know, we've got some nice drugs that help animals and people compensate for those perhaps dysfunctions that are outside the scope of anything they can help. And I guess as we're mainly focusing on enrichment for this workshop, but you know, we still want to think of that behavior management approach and using training, enrichment, and facilities and operations to help animals thrive. There are limitations to behavior management, and when you have an animal who has some sort of central nervous system dysfunction, you know, it's going to be very difficult to help them really be totally normal without perhaps some other types of therapies. So another way of looking at a definition of stereotypic behavior, and this is a definition that Georgia Mason has proposed, is the repetitive behavior is induced by frustration, repeated attempts to cope, and I think I read that wrong. Repetitive behavior induced by frustration, repeated attempts to cope, and or CNS dysfunction. And one of the good things about this particular definition is it does sort of shift the emphasis from what it looks like, just the repetitive part of it and the function part of it, to the cause. So the cause may be a CNS dysfunction. And another way of thinking about these behaviors is abnormal repetitive behavior. So in that case, there's no cause, just what it looks like. And these may not necessarily be problematic. You know, one example of something like this is, you know, if your cat's kneading. That's a repetitive behavior. Or, you know, if you shake your leg. That's technically, by definition, a stereotypic behavior. It's repeated and it serves no apparent function. But is it harmful? So I think, you know, as we think about these things, what we really want to know from an animal care and welfare perspective is, are these harmful behaviors? Are they indicative of diminished welfare? And to get to the meat of it, what can I do about them to make that animal in a situation where it's thriving? And that's really what we want to know. It's important that we recognize these behaviors and we step back and we try to think, where did they come from, how did they emerge, what can I do about them? But really, is it harmful to the animal, and what can I do about it? I think is the practical part that we really want to know. So, is every animal that's engaged in a stereotypic behavior in a state of diminished welfare? Yes? No?
No.
No. There were only a few people that voted. If an animal does a stereotype behavior, do you think it's automatically in a situation of poor welfare?
No.
Yes? No. Okay, most people think no. Yeah, I mean, I think that what we want to look at is what is the condition for that animal? Did this behavior develop over time? How intense is it? Is it causing a problem to the animal? So all of these repetitive behaviors don't mean that that animal is necessarily compromised at that moment. But they should get our attention, and we should try to look at them and figure out where they came from. Do you want to say something right now? I feel like you do.
No, I'm paying attention.
Oh, okay. I just felt your eyes all of a sudden.
Sorry.
So another, way that we refer to these stereotype behaviors is that they're a coping mechanism. The animal perhaps did not have something or had too much of something in its environment at some point and developed this coping mechanism. So if we remove that animal's coping mechanism, what might we be doing?
Decrease its welfare.
Yeah, then we might be decreasing its welfare. If the animal, the classic example, the animal paces a particular location, so I'm going to block that location so they can't pace it. Fix the problem. They don't pace there anymore.
Oh, they pull their hair out now.
Yeah, it's going to find something else to do. You can't just stop it without offering an alternative. And this is really important. And I mean, especially, some animals we know are prone to these particular locomotor stereotypies like pacing or swaying or something like that. So we have to think of this is a coping mechanism. The animal does this for a reason. Maybe there's endorphins released, there's a number of different hypotheses and data to back these things up. But the animal's doing it for a reason, and so we can't just take it away without providing an alternative. And that's really important for our animal welfare, not just the perception of somebody who sees the animal doing the behavior. It's about that animal, not somebody else's perception.
Let me give an example from bird world that I started running into just a couple of years ago. Overseas is the plucking parrots and cockatoos. The current habit now is to just put loose beaded collars on them. But it's exactly the same thing. You've taken their coping mechanism and taken it away, and probably introduced a rather unpleasant option. Okay, yeah, so it's pretty
So what do
horrifying
they
the first
do?
time I saw that.
What do you see these birds do once they've got the collars on?
I don't get to see them that long. There's a lot of work trying to get around it, I'm told.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That they go pretty nuts.
Yeah, I would imagine
Man,
it's
I'm
quite
talking
bad.
about, that's like serious restriction.
Place I just consulted, they did that, they birds started swinging.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They're doing the up and down right, I can't get to it, so I'm just gonna keep trying.
it's really cockatoo.
Yeah.
I've also seen birds just resort to screaming and
So again,
Provide an alternative, which is kind of what I say there. Yeah. Okay, so we may have animals that do various types of posturing or other self-directed things. These are often thought of as kind of a self-soothing behavior, animals who might clasp or rock or something like that. I've seen a number of, and I'm sure Darren has too, in labs, anyone else who's worked in labs, you see primates who do this eye-poking behavior, sometimes saluting, another sort of version of it. And these are often seen when the animals are really, really stressed. They may engage in some of these more really bizarre behaviors. So again, we have treatment strategies, if we think an animal is, and these are just, this is not a comprehensive treatment strategy. This is just kind of to give you some ideas of providing an alternative. We're going to get a lot more into the meat of planning, enrichment, and problem solving, and not the formal problem solving, but with regard to enrichment only, as the workshop goes on. So these are just a couple of examples. So this is not quite comprehensive, is what I want to say. But, you know, if we have an animal who engages in an abnormal behavior during times of extreme stress, you know, an alternative would be we provide this animal a safe zone or a hiding place or some way to get away from that stimulus that's so stressful. Oral types of stereotypies, tongue rolling, cribbing, regurgitation and reingestion is what R&R is there. And with some species, host stock in particular, we may see these behaviors, you know, really associated with feeding. So the treatments oftentimes will use puzzle feeders to extend foraging time. If the thought is the animal's engaged in an R&R behavior to extend foraging time on its own, well, it's a pretty gross way of doing it and harmful when they're bringing up stomach acid. So can we create something that lengthens the foraging time? Those sorts of things.
What about something like cribbing that kind of rewards the animal as they do it? Like, how do you provide something else rather than just putting on a cribbing strap? Like, how do you provide them with something that's better than what they're already doing?
Well, that's the difficulty of stereotypic behavior, right? Is if we think there's an internal physiological reinforcement, that's the self-reinforcing, the coping part of it. So that's the real challenge of these behaviors is, can you find something that will engage them in the same way but isn't harmful? So it's still about providing a behavioral alternative. If they want to chew on something, can we give them something else to chew on? If they want to lick and roll their head and, you know, tongue roll and do those sorts of things, can we provide a food puzzle that will be non-harmful and still mimic that same behavior? And it may be that there's a step-by-step process. You know, maybe you start off with something that feels very similar for the animal, but then like you write a shaping plan, you know, now you take it a little bit further away from that and a little bit further away. So you begin to move the animal towards a more appropriate and normal behavior, but maybe you have to do it very gradually. You can't just, here's a really complex puzzle feeder. Go do this instead of chewing on something else. So yeah, I think you have to plan it for the individual, especially in cases like that.
No, it's hit the nail on the head. That's the crux of the problem, is the reason they're doing this is for whatever reason it's inherently reinforcing. And, you know, you somehow have to distract them away from that. I do know that a lot of people, actually in the States, have said to me over the years that if it's plucking, you want to make sure you don't let it pluck anything else, because then it's the same behavior, just redirected, so that's bad. And I don't agree with that at all.
You know, I know.
A lot. I get that more than you can possibly imagine. And the way we look at it, because we've talked about this, is there's a reason they're doing that behavior. Okay, in birds, we pretty much know, in parrots I should say, we pretty much know from research now, it's because they're not spending enough time in captivity using their beak to get their food like they do in the wild, okay? So if you focus on the fact that it's not so important what they're plucking, but the fact that they need to do that behavior with their beak, and so giving them enrichment that requires them to use the beak is actually now demonstrated as the absolute best way to reduce the plucking behavior. So if you hear that in your discussions, I hear that kind of stuff mostly from trainers. If you hear that in your discussions, the literature does not support that, and in fact it supports the opposite, as it does sort of experience.
Well, and I guess that also, another discussion sort of along those lines that comes up is, oh, the animal's doing a stereotype swim pattern or pacing, we can't give it enrichment right now because you'll reinforce it. Kind of gets back to your question. The animal's self-reinforcing, most likely. And so you're giving it an alternative. And that should be a good thing. And have you heard that particular argument as much lately? I feel like it's kind of waned. Does anyone else, have you experienced that or had that discussion, maybe with yourself or somebody else? I mean, I think our experience and feeling is that if the animal's really in like that deep stereotype repetitive behavior, it's reinforcing on a very different level, and the thing that you throw out there as a distraction probably isn't going to reinforce the behavior. They're not going to stereotype to get the thing that you just put in there. They're doing it for a different reason altogether. But Andrea, you said you've had that.
I just remember hearing, I think it was with the Sun Bears, and I don't know if it was the previous Sun Bears or if it was Ting, but I remember that being a concern, hearing that changes were being made because there was concern about the timing of throwing food out there was coinciding with Ting's pacing.
Yeah.
Well, that's, that's even, when you're talking about carnivores like a bear, that's even, I think, less of an argument for that because if the stimulus that they're responding to, which is what's causing pacing, is that they're hungry, that's what they're supposed to do, get up and go find food. So, and again, Margaret said early on that you really have to look at the context in which these behaviors develop. So, you know, if you want, later on, we can talk about, I kind of have a, when I go as a consultant, little rubric that I use to decide in, you know, the 10 minutes I get to see an animal in its lifetime, if I think the stereotypy is worth worrying about or not. I have different things I look at. And one of the things I look at is what context is that behavior happening in. If that bear paces for 15 minutes before feeding time every day, I got stuff to do. Okay, not there. Good. Sorry. So I think it's all
day long.
Yeah, this is one of my notes to say, this is complex stuff. This is not easy. That's why experts still don't agree on a definition even, okay? And they certainly don't know how to assess it, no matter what they say. So it is really complex, and all of these things you're raising are really good talking points. And,
So then, Val, would you consider those to be more anticipatory behaviors? So an elephant that rocks or swims before food comes, or a macaw that screams before?
again, I think it's a really individual thing,
Yeah,
and I think it absolutely can be that.
versus an ARB. So you can distinguish between,
ARB?
sorry, a repetitive behavior.
Yeah.
I kind of feels like a continuum, yeah, like, I mean, it's anticipatory until it crosses into,
Yeah,
It's repetitive,
right?
so by definition, it's a stereotype behavior, but the cause is anticipation. And because feeding happens at this time every day, shifting happens at this time every day, it's one of those schedule-induced stereotype behaviors.
or with the bear, remember, they can smell when the food is moving towards them, even if it's just moving from the fridge over there to near the door of the enclosure. Okay. Huh?
No slugs. There's the
I
answer.
think that's the Elizabethan collar solution. To stop shooting the dog.
In the vein of not wanting to reinforce abnormal behaviors and that the fear behind that and whether or not it's applicable or not, do you feel like that's a very species-specific thing? Because I've definitely seen cockatoos specifically that have plucking problems that will pluck the second you turn away and then stop the second you turn back and say hi to them. So it's one of those things where I definitely feel like there are individuals that have learned for sure to do those.
You asked two different questions.
That's
That's species and individual.
That's true.
And that cockatoo has you trying to pay attention to it whenever it starts to pluck. So that's a whole different thing.
Yeah, and I think I may have shared the story of this elephant that would do a behavior similar to the one that I showed you. She would grab her back foot and just tusk it. She was an African, so she had pretty good sized tusks, and she would grab that back foot, and she was damaging herself. And the behavior was the same. It looked exactly the same, but it occurred under what appeared to be three different situations. One was when she was in that la-la zone, where she was self-reinforcing. I mean, she was deep in this stereotypic lost zone, just peg, 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 her foot. Then another situation where it would occur is because she had damaged her foot so much, sometimes when it was oozing and pussy and gross, it seemed she would grab her foot as a pain thing and beat it up even more. Logic doesn't always prevail, right? But she would do it sometimes in pain. And then the other time she would do it was when we were training the other elephant. And she would go, peg, 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 peg. Do you see what I'm doing over here? So exact same behavior, but three different causes. reasons for it to emerge. So the treatments were very different. When she was deep in that stereotypy, la la land, give her enrichment. When she's pegging it and looking at you, ignore her. So I think that's something else that you have to look at too, is what does that behavior really mean in that moment?
Yeah, it all comes down to looking at the context in which it occurs, and it's not just overall, but each time. I see that with carnivores, by the way, too.
Yeah.
Behavior and.
Are you looking? Do you see what I'm doing? Okay, and we're 2 slides away from you. So, okay. So when is lunch coming? We're just wondering how to, if we want to take a little,
20 minutes.
about 20 minutes? Okay, all right. All right, then we'll just sort of take a break somewhere.
Well, so the problem is that my computer can't work on the system today. So I put it on an external, we're hoping it'll work through Margaret's computer, but we haven't had a chance to test it yet. So we can either kind of do that live in front of you, or we can continue on until it's time to take a break, and then, you know, be a little bit out of order, but it's not that big a deal. It's kind of up to you guys.
I think that's a good idea.
Oh, the latter?
Let's continue on until lunch comes and then
Then I can
you
play
guys
it.
can eat and play at the same time.
Okay. Yay.
Sounds like a plan.
2 of my favorite things. Okay, so, you know, again, we sort of have this category of abnormal behaviors, and in general, these are things that aren't species appropriate, perhaps they're not repetitive, and we want to gauge if they're harmful, if they're indicative of poor welfare, and use all of the same strategies and thought processes that we would use for our stereotype behavior. You know, we want to really gauge, are these indicative of poor welfare, and how do we address it? Is it the bear that paces 10 minutes before feeding time, or is it the bear that paces all day long? Okay, this is actually what Val is going to talk about. So if you remember those managing for optimal welfare, we have mental health, we have behavioral health, and we have physical health. And I'm just going to skip over this slide because she's going to talk about all of this, but just be thinking as we continue to go forward, physical health and physical fitness are not the same thing, and we're going to spend some time talking about that and how we can begin to think about, you know, again, really managing for optimal physical health. Okay, so coming back to animal welfare and how we think about it, again, I'll read these to you. Just some additional thoughts on maybe what animal welfare means, because as we've said, it's hard to define. Once we define it, it's even harder to assess it. So just some additional thoughts on what animal welfare what animal welfare is. So the foundation of animal welfare assumes that animals experience feelings similar to our own and are conscious of their state of well-being. Thus, they will suffer in a poor environment and they're aware of their suffering. So not only do they suffer, but they know they're suffering. And this is, I think, a crux of animal welfare that we have to admit. You know, maybe we don't want to recognize that fish have feelings. Well, perhaps they do. Good animal welfare starts with physical health. Good animal welfare implies that animals have positive emotions, such as pleasure and contentment, rather than only negative ones, such as fear or frustration. And we humans label those latter emotions as suffering. So we have to admit that animals have these feelings and they recognize the difference and how that impacts what they do. Animal welfare can represent any one of an assortment of somewhat vague notions. I hope you're getting a feeling for that. These may pertain to health, pleasant feelings, pastoral harmony, or other concepts. And it was suggested that these 3 distinct ethical concerns are that animals should lead natural lives through the development and use of their natural adaptations and capabilities. I think that's something that we really want to strive for in animal management. That's giving them the opportunity to be what they're supposed to be. That animals should feel well by being free from prolonged intense fear, pain, negative states, and by experiencing normal pleasures. And again, this does not suggest that fear and pain and negative states are completely absent from their environment, but they're not exposed to these things in a prolonged way. And finally, that animals should function well in the sense of satisfactory health, growth, normal functioning, and physiological and behavioral systems. There are just some other things to think about. I think it's good to have all of these different sorts of ideas as you consider what animal welfare really means. And for those of you, everybody works with different sorts of animals, individuals as well as species, and maybe some words are more meaningful to you with one species as compared to another. So that's why we offer you all of these different words and ideas, so hopefully you can grab onto something that's really meaningful and allows you to apply it to the animals that you're taking care of. So again, getting down to the nuts and bolts of what we really want to do is, how do we determine what an animal's welfare state is? First off, please know that animal welfare is important to all animals. Of course, you're probably concerned with the ones that you're directly caring for, but what about the ones that you're caring for to feed to the animals that you're caring for? We want to think about those animals as well. Welfare is important to everybody. It doesn't matter if you're food for somebody else, if you're entertainment for somebody else, if you're research for human health. Welfare is important to everybody. So think outside your exhibit night housing box and what other creatures are around the environment. Know that individuals have well-being, not populations. So each of you may be experiencing a fabulous state of welfare right now because you're so engaged mentally and you're anticipating a delicious lunch that will be here soon. So you're all in a very high state of positive welfare. But I would still refer to each of you individually, not the group. It's lovely if we can say the group all has good welfare, but it's still about the individual. And I think really important, again, to keep in mind is welfare is about the individual's perception of its emotional and physical state. So it's not what I think you're experiencing. I may say, gee, I think you're having a pretty good day. And you go, well, really, I'm just a happy, smiley person, and this is not, what you see on the outside is not necessarily what's on the inside. So that, my perception of you may be very different than what's happening in your mind and heart and body in that moment. So it's about the individual's perception of themselves. When we talk about fear and desensitization, one of the things I think I typically say is, that animal may be afraid of that object, even though he's seen it a million times. It doesn't matter if he's seen it a million times, he's still afraid of it. So it's that animal's perception. And that's what we want to really keep in mind with welfare, not what we think they should be doing. Okay, welfare exists on a continuum from distress being the worst end of it to pleasure being the happiest end of it. But we say the good well-being zone is somewhere in the middle, slightly shifted. If you notice the little bracket here is slightly shifted towards pleasure, but it doesn't always have to be in the zone of pleasure. Okay, stress. We all have it. Maybe we all want it. Do you like a roller coaster ride? Do you like a thrill every now and again? No. You like to drive fast, work with large, dangerous carnivores.
But she's still staying her head.
Talkative and passive, and I don't need to work.
Horror movies?
Horror movies? Ooh, yeah, I don't do that.
Yeah, I don't either.
No, we're back to never saying, always never.
But I don't. I walked out of, what was that one in the woods where they're camping?
Blair Witch.
Blair Witch. Not only did it make me nauseated, but I didn't want something to ruin camping for me. Anyway, I digress. So, stress. Like I said, we all have it, we all experience it. Maybe we want it, but we want to be able to get away from it. So we want it for a little while. Some of us are thrill seekers. And so it's important to recognize that stress is absolutely a normal part of our lives. We're not looking to eliminate it. Exposure to very high levels of stress over an extended period of time, or stress that you cannot get away from, those are the situations that lead to that far end of the continuum to distress. So we think of distress as inescapable extreme stress. So anything that you can't get away from. And this is where we get into a really poor welfare state or situation. So again, if you think about those definitions of welfare, they all involve coping with challenges. And really, challenge is just another way of saying stress. When you challenge something, you stress it a little bit. So if you can tolerate a little bit of stress and you're coping with it, or even a fair bit of stress, you cope with it pretty well, you're probably a fairly healthy individual. And we know that prolonged stress may inhibit coping. It may diminish health, immunofunction decreases when you're exposed to extreme stress over time, and ultimately there may be physical and psychological, physiological problems that are associated with that long-term exposure to stress. So stress versus de-stress, or distress, not de-stress. That would be the other end of it. If you can't de-stress your stress, what are you? Distressed. Probably somebody else has said it before. All right. Anyway, so you understand the difference in stress and distress? All right, very good. So we know stress can come from a lot of different sources. And in captivity, these might be just some of the ones that we would consider. Social stressors, maybe animals are very subordinate, or don't forget the dominants who feel like they have to always be vigilant. That's stressful for the dominants too. And in captivity, animals can't get away from each other. They can't leave their social group at will. Maybe they can't move to the perimeter of the social group because they're spatially confined. So this is what I mean by social stressors, the rigors of social housing and living. We know we have to expose animals to things that might make them frightened, veterinary procedures, moving from one place to another, any number of things that they experience. Boredom, sensory deprivation. Hopefully this is becoming less and less of a problem for captive animals, certainly zoo animals at the Oakland Zoo. You travel to other parts of the country, or not other parts of the country, other parts of the world, or perhaps some smaller roadside kind of zoos or situations. You may see animals that are living in pretty deprived conditions. I would suggest that aversive meaning like punishment or negative reinforcement based training techniques are going to lead to fear, and that can certainly cause an animal stress. Inappropriate training techniques might just mean if you're trying to use positive reinforcement, maybe you're somehow frustrating the animal in using your positive reinforcement, and that can cause stress. So even if you're well-intentioned, you can still cause stress, and I think we need to be aware of that and think about how our animals are learning as we engage them in a training session. Are they mentally challenged in a positive way, or are they becoming so frustrated from it? Do we have unreasonable training objectives? Do we expect them to do a double backflip through a flaming hoop? And it's a gecko that can't do, I don't know, a gecko could probably do that, I don't know. Some animal who couldn't do that. We want to have our training objectives that are reasonable not only for the species, but for the individual as well. And recognize the limitations of not only behavior management, but training specifically. Sometimes there are things that, maybe you just can't do, which is a bummer. I hate to say that, but it is true. And certainly a big one would be an inappropriate physical environment. Are animals able to locomote in a species-appropriate way? Does the environment provide the opportunity for social housing that would be appropriate for that animal? So all of those aspects of the physical environment, are they appropriate for the animal? So we want to recognize what's in front of us. Are there stressors in front of us? Can we identify techniques, be it desensitization or an enrichment strategy such as providing a hiding spot for the animal? Do we have strategies that we can use to provide behavioral alternatives and allow animals to cope with whatever those stressors are? And oftentimes we do, and again, we're here talking about enrichment for this workshop, but every workshop that Val and I usually teach together, every other workshop we teach together, we talk about training and enrichment and that behavioral management approach. So, of course, we're here talking about enrichment now, but we do want to keep in mind the behavior management approach and using all the components of that.
Can I just point out, and this may be completely unnecessary because y'all may be very aware of this, but one of the things I run into a lot is talking about your training techniques and what kind of behaviors you're training and making sure that what you're doing is working for them. I know y'all know that training goes on outside of your training session, right? But what I see a lot is that the same kind of problems appear anytime you're interacting. I mean, I'm not saying this well at all, and I'm sorry. Walking past the enclosure with a bucket of food, okay, talking on your phone or your radio or whatever, and the animal's like, oh, food's going by, and they follow you, and then you just walk off. Or you bait them to go through a door, and then they don't actually get the food because you get distracted, or whatever. The point is everything that Margaret said about training is also outside of a formal training session. And that may be obvious to you, and I don't know, so.
I think it's a good point. Training always happens, so pay attention to what you're doing all the time.
That's the way to say it.
I kind of am at a place where I want to take a little bit of a break now. I feel like people are starting to look glassy-eyed. So if pizza should be here relatively soon, maybe it's a good time to get up, prepare yourself for lunch.
It's a pleasure. So we're going to start when the food comes. We'll, throw some food at each of you and so Colleen, Darren, whoever, thank you all very much for bringing me here. I love being close to Oakland Zoo. I have to say that when people ask me where my favorite zoo in the world is, I always say I can't answer. But one of my favorite zoos in the States is right here. You may not see it as a visitor, but because I know the stress that's put on behavior management here is more than most of the zoos I visit in the US. So, well done y'all. Okay, so I've already lost the video. Sorry about the, wow, you never go backwards, do you?
I only go forward, baby.
There's nothing left on the forward one at all. This is just to remind you where we were with Margaret. She was going through the sort of three categories. I'm a very categorized person, so it helps me to think of things in categories. So I just wanted to give you this talk because it's come to, I did this talk with some of our other instructors at Shape, Mark Easton-Jones and Chris Hales from the UK. In the work that we do overseas, we spend a lot of time with sanctuaries, government sanctuaries and rescue centers, where animals are going back out into the wild. And I cannot tell you how many years we look at these animals and go, well, what do you mean you're putting that cat back in the wild? Oh yeah, tomorrow the truck's coming, we're going to dump him out. I'm like, and he'll be dead the day after tomorrow. What's the point? He's totally not prepared for it. So that physically, let alone all the other issues that can happen. Oh, good. Well, no, that's great. So let's try not to look like this while we're getting our pizza. And come back as quickly as you can. Oh, so we
Both of us were good.
You need for
No, I didn't.
Because there was
Like
some
under
stuff
Okay.
there, some issues left in there, so
Well,
I
that key
just
number
started
yourself.
So you have to hold it.
Anyone else want ranch?
It's hard. All right.
One up there and I dropped it off and
All right. Okay, so in my experience, what I run into when people talk about physical assessment, the thing that always comes up, I don't have a point because can't find it. There. It's green in my background screen, so you can't see it. That's funny. Is people focus on this. We all have, do you guys do body condition scoring here?
Yes.
Yeah, and a lot of it is, whatever system you use, a lot of it is focused on, right, skinny to obesity, right? Which is great. Absolutely never stop doing that. We spend a lot of time trying to teach that in other countries. But what we started realizing is nobody's really thinking about what's going on inside, okay? And that's really what I want to talk about this time. It's not just enough to look at an animal and say that it's healthy. This is a tiger in a zoo here in the States that is in excellent health, okay? It doesn't have parasites, it doesn't have any disease, its skin's good, its eyes are good, its weight is good. It's in good health. But when you compare, look at the 5 points of musculature I'm pointing out here, and this is a wild tiger. Who is ripped? Arnie Schwarzenegger tigers, yeah. Okay, and I'm sure this tiger may not even be as healthy as the one, as this guy, right? But he's clearly more fit. Okay, so I want people to start thinking like this, and I don't need them to be ripped, but I do want them to be in better shape than they are now. In this country, this particular exercise, you'll see in a minute, the spring, Hessian Sacrament spring, which I know you've done here and we've done in the workshops here. I've never done this on a tiger in the US or the UK, or any large cat in the US and the UK, where it hasn't absolutely exhausted them within the first, usually 5 minutes. Okay, and they're standing like, and the vet the next day is like, what the hell did you do to the tiger, In developing countries, where these animals are coming in out of the wild, okay, so age is an important factor, and I always have trouble figuring out where to throw this into the talk, but so most of my experience, both in zoos and in workshops, is with carnivores, although I work with everything. And I'm astounded at how protective we are of our young carnivores in captivity, in zoos. And I worked when the first panda was born down in San Diego, and good God, we had padding all over the enclosure, poor thing, and it wasn't allowed to climb higher than this, and but in the wild, baby bears bounce. They fall and they bounce, and yeah, stuff happens to them, and we're worried about our individuals in zoos, and we should be, okay? But in general, they're kind of designed to handle some of these things, all right? And if they grew up in an enriched environment where they're developing their abilities the same way they would in the wild, they're far more likely to tolerate whatever happens to them. And I watched our baby panda fall 40 feet out of a tree and bounce and shake herself and get up and trot off, because that's what they're supposed to do, okay? All right, so here's a really nice example from our friends in the UK. We're going to look at 2 UK cubs raised in the enclosure I'm going to show you by mom. By the way, this zoo is the most famous zoo in the world for breeding and successfully breeding and raising clouded leopards. They're the ones who the people in Singapore and clouded leopard habitat call when they have questions. And then we're going to look at 2 cubs raised here in the US. I actually don't know what zoo. They were hand raised here, and then they were sent over to the zoo in England, where they moved into, they have like 8 of these enclosures, so one of the 8, but they're all virtually identical. Okay. So here's the little kids, hand raised by mom at 3 months. Remember, cloudies are one of the only 2 species of cat that can go down hook nose first, right? Because their wrists turn like squirrels do. 3 months old. I mean, you know, they're not even thinking about weaning yet, right? Look at his tail, that's great. And Mom, you know, comes up and has a look and checks it out. But you know, he's hanging on okay. He's doing good, right? Okay. Now, here's the two from the US in that enclosure at 6 months of age. Not 3, but 6. Okay, they're doing okay. They're on this nice, solid, flat surface, right? Now, this is right where that little baby was you just saw, the same place in the climbing structure. Look at the difference. Okay, the little guy's going down, straight down. This guy's having trouble at a 45-degree angle. Okay? Is that obvious to you? I mean, to carnivore people, it's pretty obvious. Is that obvious to everybody else? Mm-hmm. Okay, let's go back to those same two little guys at 6 months of age. Same age as these, okay? By the way, this is about 30 feet high, the enclosure. Which is what they should be doing. Some bears can do that in a mesh enclosure too.
They are like squirrels.
They're like, I was thinking of them as kind of raccoony. Yeah. Okay? Huge difference. Huge difference. Why? Because these guys grew up learning as their bodies were able to handle what they were being asked to do. The bodies developed and their balance grew, their motor control grew, and their strength grew. And their confidence, I would put in there too, I think. So, that's what I want to look at today, is our general goal. In SHAPE, we look at things with general goals and specific goals. We'll talk more about that next month or in November. But our general goal is going to be that we want to encourage, as Margaret had on her slide, the appropriate type and level of activity. And our specific goals, we're going to look at physical exercise for promoting strength, okay? And also confidence. And we're going to look at agility to get their balance and their fine motor control working. So here's some examples of the kind of things that I really like that we do now. Okay? This was an animal who had to be in the back for a while, so we're getting them some exercise. How do I make this second video work? Oh, that way. And, you know, a boomer ball, when we took over to Hungary, we had the slings. It's great. Okay? This is good stuff. And they should be getting this stuff all the time. Okay? I don't want people to stop doing whatever enrichment you're doing. I just want you to think about, are we really going far enough? Okay? Here's some agility examples. Love this. Nice stretch. Goats are supposed to do that. They don't look like they're supposed to, but they are. And this is a sonotube, you know those? They're for construction, for pouring concrete to hold pillars. Yeah. Poor little cubs in China. You weren't there because it was in China. Their food's right there. They've never had anything, ever. Okay? Their food's right there, and all three of them are like, oh my God. And seesaws are fantastic. We use them for all sorts of hoof stuff and carnivores. Little cats play on them. Anyway, all this stuff is great, but I really constantly want you to be questioning. Okay? Don't be complacent. Are we really developing what we need them to be developing? So here's some of the other things that we've tried in workshops that I think are going just a little bit farther. So let them tug against each other and run each other down over this sack. And this went on for a really long time because the male really wanted it, but she got it. By the way, this was, they get their food once a day in the morning and go out. I mean, the food's out. And this was right when they came out. And it was well over an hour that they utilized all the different enrichment we put out there before any one of the 5 lions even thought about going to their food. And if they're not in the same enclosure, they can still fight against each other. hard to see, but this is mom and dad Jag, and here's the kids who have just been weaned. And you can tell this guy's never had enrichment because he's scared. Oh! It's just cranking through in it. But the idea here, of course, is once one of them moves it, it moves to the other side. And hopefully, eventually they can do this. I think, did you guys do this with your elephants in the barn? Was it you guys who did this all those years ago? No?
Oh, yeah.
We've done it with elephants, we've done it with birds, we've done it with all sorts of carnivores in adjacent, you can go over the top and down below. And they actually were able to get this guy to do weightlifting, so to speak, by attaching his hide to this huge log that was in the enclosure. It was 45 minutes before he stopped, and he only stopped because he got the hide off.
How did you tell it?
Yeah. Everybody always asks, and I hate that question because we didn't approve it, but the owner said, no, I did this all the time with the Jags on smaller logs, it won't be a problem. Staples. 75 staples, we counted them all. As soon as he got it off, we pulled it out and we counted them all. There were a couple missing, but they didn't go in him as it turns out. But it's easy to do. You can bolt it in. You know, you can even, if you have a tree drill, you know, you can just all the way through even and bolt it. But this is what he wanted to do. But it really works great. Springs, you guys know what kind of springs you get, right? You guys use the
No.
overhead torsions.
That's the flaw in your directions. It doesn't say.
In my direction.
Directions originally in the 90s, it didn't say what kind of drawers.
Okay, you need an overhead torsion from Home Depot. It's the only place I know in this country to get them, and I don't know anywhere else in the world I can get them. Don't get the side extensions, although if that's all you can get, I've run these in, thank you, in parallel, not in tandem, in parallel, 2 or 3 of them for a Tiger, and they work. This, I've got the SKU number on the photo. I'll remind me,
Yes.
and you all have my email. Or you
Because
get
you
it?
thought ours were too big.
Well, the thing is, and the interesting thing about the way springs work is the diameter actually carries less load. The bigger diameter, at the same wire size, the bigger diameter carries less load than the smaller diameters. It's counterintuitive, but it's the way springs work. So this is the one that Home Depot carries that carries the most load of them all. And it's about 360 pounds of dead weight. Okay? I'll send you the SKU number. And I can get them in San Jose, so worst case scenario, tell me you want them, they're $30 a piece, I'll bring as many as you want. You gotta pay me for them.
What's on the other end? Who's pulling on the other end?
Chrissy. That same Tiger in Virginia. By the way, female lions, I never use for a demo. I give it to them all the time, but not for a demo. Because 75% of the time, I think, those pinheads figure out, they sniff the bag, they pull on it, it doesn't walk away, they walk over to the rope, take a sniff, put the rope in their mouth and go, and then take a sack and leave. Male lions fine, they never figured that out. Tigers, they never figured that out. Female lions, damn it.
Smart and social.
I won't even do it anymore. Ruins the demo.
Do you put anything inside the bag to make it more appealing to them?
Yes, I want them to have something to grab and hold, so it's usually either straw or dead leaves, dry leaves. No smell. God, I don't know why people ever put scent on a Hessian sack for carnivores, because if I could bottle that scent, I could sell it. And that's like their favorite scent ever. So don't waste your enrichment options. Put that on something they don't like the smell of. But you can already see he's starting to get tired, and look at the muscle, or lack thereof. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So for agility, this is the first time these animals had a rope or anything really that moved to land on. And you can see his dinner right there, hand care. This is the most determined look I've ever seen on a bird. It took him almost 5 minutes, this video goes almost 5 minutes before he finally got it. He was so proud of himself. I know I'm being really silly, but look at that. And he's working really hard.
If he had a solid branches, he could go fly.
He does, and some of them are little, but they don't like those branches for some reason. So So they actually sit on the fence, they hang onto the fence. If I run the video all the way, you'll actually see him, it's horrible looking. It's like he has to smash into the fence to grab hold. Did he look proud of himself? Okay, I really like rope artificial forests, even if they're in the back areas off exhibit, because people don't want to look at the ropes in the enclosures. I don't know, do you guys know what this is, or do you want me to explain it?
Explain.
Okay. So in whatever size enclosure you're working in, this one happened to be from Macaw's. I think there were only blue and golds in here at the time, and it was very tall. So we went up, I don't know, that is 10, 12 feet, and put some horizontal ropes, but lots of times I'll use bamboo or something instead. And then from those we hang or splice in verticals. The verticals are spaced apart. You don't like to splice?
It was the word splice.
I'm sorry, I really suck at splicing. And I finally decided it's because I'm left-handed, and everybody always teaches you the other way. But one of our instructors is phenomenal at splicing. And I really think when I was a keeper, I wished I knew how to splice. I think all keepers should know how to splice, especially bird. So we hang the verticals how far apart? Far enough apart that the bird can't fly through like this, whatever your bird is. I want him to go like this, or I want him to go like this. Okay, because we're approximating the natural effect of the forest, right? So there's a bunch of verticals, and then the next row of verticals is staggered. So it's not linear all the way through the enclosure. It's staggered. So he's going to weave his way through all of these things, okay? And then if you're really with it, you're going to feed him in these nice marine ropes, because you can just do the twisty thing. You need to twist it open, pop it. You need 2 people. You need 3 hands. So. Twist it open, hold it, pop something through, and let go, and it holds it. So put food in, and you'll see we've got bananas and other things in here too. Okay. Never put them above keeper level, but keeper can reach, because I don't want any ladders in there, because if you need a ladder, you won't ever do it. I was a keeper. Okay, so, you know, this high is how high food goes, that's fine. So the bird's going to fly through, bing, land on a rope, like landing on a branch, eat their food, and either climb up or down, or maybe even to kind of hop over to the next one, or climb up and over and down the next one, or fly to the next one to eat. Okay, the food's scattered throughout the enclosure, and the animal is doing the behavior with the same muscles and agility as if they're flying through the forest. The only other thing I want to point out is you never go up to the top, unless it's a total understory animal, because I do want them to be able to use some space just to fly over the canopy. Okay? So it's one of my favorite things. Fire hose is great. I know you guys donated some fire hose. In fact, this might even be the fire hose you guys donated. Now I have to think about that. You guys donated some fire hose for me to take. And I think this was, this is in Vietnam. But fire hose is great climbing structure, and if you don't like the look of it, you can paint it or dye it. Dye it, it's a pain in the butt, but you can do it. And sometimes they even surprise you. Watch this guy over here. Never thought they'd use it that way. We do a lot of dynamic branch stuff. This was 16 macaws. We put 11 new branches in, all of them connected to each other. Okay? So when one moves, they all move. And you can see we hadn't even finished yet, and they're landing. This happens to us all the time. We don't even finish putting up branching. And whether it's a raptor or a macaw or whatever, they're on them before we got them tied off. So they do seem to like. And when I go to an enclosure in a zoo and they'll have like a little swing, you know, the birds, as many as will fit on the swing, are on the swing. So when they have these dynamic branches, they're almost always on them. It's not just for birds. This is just, again, to show you. This is actually the owner of the sanctuary. Just to show you how connected everything is with cable and or rope. And this is for Coati. It's really nice. Yeah. This is in Brazil. And you can do this with big animals too. This is one we built for a jaguar in Bulgaria. There's no way that jaguar could handle this, okay, without months of development, okay? But before we tightened everything down, we just did this so that I could show people how much it can swing. Okay, this is a moving log going up to a moving platform off of her existing platform.
So just to clarify then, this is like the ultimate what you want the Jaguar to be able to do, but then you take the maneuverability
We
out
tied it
and then
down.
you approximate.
So it's just a little wiggle.
So out, and then once they're able to do that, then you take it to the next level,
You,
the next
you
level.
slowly lengthen the tether lines until you get as much, you can get up to this out of the system.
So you're building them
So
up.
however much you want to go to, okay? And for those of you who are interested in how we did that, we actually worked with a welder and got these little saddles built so that the log could be welded in place and it would move like this. Okay. Look, things are not always going to work at first. This is Zakuwati. Okay, it got to a certain point, and I was like, yeah, no, I'm done. But that's okay, there was lots of other enrichment in there. He ran down to the bottom, he played with a little bamboo tube feeder, he did them. Within 10 minutes, he was back up there. Okay? It's okay. Animals are scared of new things. It's good for them to be that way. Alright. This is a video I don't think we ever found, but it's okay, it's just a cat. Yeah. This is just to show, carnivore guy. This is just to show you that, yeah, at first they're going to have trouble. Okay? This cat jumps up here, and when he jumps down, his back feet slip off. But you already saw the cloudy coast. It's the same kind of thing. Okay, so I want to give you a real life example that this stuff can work. Okay, Deb Ing, who is another instructor, both Margaret and I work with a lot. She works at a place called Kadoorie Farms in Hong Kong. If any of you are ever going over to Hong Kong, let us know, because you should definitely go there. The whole sanctuary is awesome. When I was there, my trip was after Guangzhou, so it was 2013.
So we were in China.
Yeah, 2013. 2013. 2013 or 14, I don't know. And I went over there, and she and I were brainstorming because 5 of the 6 kites they had in this huge flight area that had been brought in, rescued, and they wanted to release them. They couldn't fly. They literally, when they did try and fly, they were falling to the ground, they were panting, they were, you know, just completely stressed and distressed. And so we sat there and said, you know what? The way perching is, first of all, it's hard to get up to the upper perches, and then the middle perches are metal, and the horizontal bits are so short that these kites can't land without some sexy wing action going on, you know, and these guys are not up to snuff. And so they can't make it all the way across the whole flight area, which is the only other option, and that's why they fall to the ground. So she reworked both ends, so they were much easier to access with your feet, I mean, get up to without flying. And then she reworked all the middle stuff, putting in more and adding extensions to those metal poles. That's all she did. There was no other change. None. Literally. And this is a true story. She changed the perching. Okay? And within a year, 4 of them were ready to go. Okay? It can be that simple. Seriously, it can be that simple. All right? 3 years they've been in there without recovering enough to be able to even fly the aviary. And within 10 months, there's no training that went on, there's no encouraging them to fly. It's just let them do it at their own pace.
And they were wild birds that came in.
Yes, yes. Two of them I think had been shot, and the other ones I don't think one of them had a broken wing, and I don't remember the story at all.
But they knew how.
They knew how to fly to start with, yes. It was just they didn't have enough muscle to take advantage of the physical fitness equipment that they were given. Okay? So, you know, good training, you take a step back, right? Okay, so that was a bunch of non-food stuff. Let's look at some food examples. Have you seen this video? These are the poor guys I told you that when I did this, they didn't know to move the hay to find food. The food is in the same place it always is, it's just that we put straw on top of it. It was about 35 minutes before one of the 26 animals in here, just saying, kind of went, oh! And then everybody else saw. But that's just sad. not a developing country, so that was very easy. Okay? Again, this is awesome. To me, this is minimal. They gotta at least search a way to get their food. Okay? But again, are they really working for those calories? And that's what I'd like to see. So that stretchy goat we looked at was nice, but we can make it even more difficult by putting all their bunches along ropes, along the same ropes, so that when one of the 52 goats pulls over here, the other ones start bouncing around too. Okay? It's not mean, it's okay. That's what goats do. Why do you have that face on, Darren? You're scaring me.
No.
Oh no! Oh, bear didn't work. Oh, that's too bad. This was a workshop we did in the Republic of Georgia, and this bear, there was free food everywhere, and he was bumping food out of the barrel like crazy. And this is our class plus the visitors right up front, and he didn't care. He was gonna get that barrel, all the food out of that barrel, before he did anything else. And he really wasn't able to stand up as long as he did. So he was another analgesic. Just my measure of success. This little guy is only 3 years old and came in from the wild, and he'd been in for about 6 months, and he'd been fed this way every day that he gets fed. So this he can do. Okay, this is one of our videos that went viral. It's hard to see. He's got his claws just dug in there, and I never even realized how much they use their tails for balance until I saw this and started thinking about it. And the meat's on a bungee. Okay, but you can even see when he jumped up on it, he was careful not to get too much motion going. I mean, he really knows what he's doing. Okay, if you look at this over and over again. But this is one of the reasons that we all really hate listservs about enrichment and these videos that get put up on YouTube. They're fantastic. Please don't misunderstand. Sharing this information, both in words and videos and photos, is great. The problem is people tend to just, take that 30-second soundbite away and say, I'm going to do this here. Okay, and they don't take into effect any of the parameters that you should be considering. Okay, so this guy can do this, but he's had 6 months to practice. Oh yeah, and before that he was killing his own food in the wild, okay? And so I have actually visited zoos where I've seen this done exactly like this, only usually it's higher. And I have watched animals fall, and you can see it on the videos that get shared. You watch them fall and clunk, they're smacked in the face with this pallet. I'm sorry, that will break a jaw of these guys. They're not designed to take a hit like that, okay? Or, breaking ribs from falling off them or getting hit by them. You've got to start with what your animal's able to do, okay? And you can't get that from somebody else's video. You have to figure that out yourself. This is an easy fix, just like we talked about, is you're going to put a rock or a log under here and tie a rope to it. So it has very little movement. And you might even not use a bungee, you might just use a cable, okay? And over time you lengthen the rope, add the bungee, and eventually it all goes away and they can do this, but you've got to build up to it. Okay, how hard are we cutting?
Oh yeah, we're pretty hard.
We're over.
Yeah, we're over now.
Yeah, we should.
Right now, or in a couple of slides. It's not going to be finished anyway. So. We'll finish it tomorrow.
Yeah, then let's just finish it tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, that'd be good. Yeah, keep everybody on the schedule. Okay,
Okay.
thank you, girls,
Thank
very
you.
much.
Thank you. See you tomorrow. So yesterday we were just talking about the difference between physical health and physical fitness, and I had given you a whole bunch of examples of doing some non-food enrichment to develop their physical strength and agility. And now we just started going into some examples of using food to do that, okay? So the last one I showed should have been that one. You remember that? Okay. So here's an oldie but goodie. This is actually one of the very first carnivore enrichment things that was published over 30 years ago now. And it's just a hanging pole that they have to climb up. This is for snow leopards, but it works for all the leopard cats. They have to climb up the pole. It used to be a stationary pole, but now hanging is good. And stick their paw inside that hole, drag their meat out in pieces and drop down and eat it. So, oldie but goodie. And then just a thing that's a little bit of a pet peeve for me is, okay, these arboreals, animals that are like this. The little red pandas really don't want to come out of trees like ever. For any reason. And yet, everywhere I go, this is normal. And in fact, they even take their bamboo, which would be so easy to throw up, and just drop that on the ground too. And usually it's right in front of the public, because that's the only time I get to see them. So probably pretty dang stressful for them. What I don't understand is, everybody's really good at making flagpole feeders for giraffe. Why don't we just do it for all sorts of arboreal guys? Okay. And these guys are easy because, you know, the whole raising system and stuff, you know, they're not a bear, they're not tearing it apart. It's going to be pretty easy to do it safely. So this is actually a place in the UK, and that is where the pandas and binorongs are fed. They live there. But the public, you know, are told where to look, and they don't seem to care. Okay, this one's fun. I like this example because it works for the keepers. This is just... Oh, this little guy that has to be turned on somehow. Here's on. Okay, so they can easily drop it down, put the meat on it, raise it up, tie it off. And this is for lynx and caracal. This is in Sweden, I think. Can you see them?
Oh.
Miss. There we go. Now, the one thing I do want to show you, see that black bar? That's the top of the enclosure.
You can jump higher than the top.
Well, you're pretty much there now, yeah. Yeah, so, I don't know how to make these go back. Look, watch these guys. They're not quite as good. But see how high they're going? And this is one of the things I have to point out in the zoos that we work in. If we start fixing up your critters, you really need to reassess all of your enclosures. Okay. Margays is the other species of cat, besides the cloudies we talked about, who can go down head first. So let's get them doing that. The dead chicks are tied up with grass fibers, so there's no safety issue. And they hop across a couple of poles to get to this little pole, climb down to get the chicks. Really, really nice. And
Val, what are they tied up with? The
grass,
Oh.
just so simple. Yeah, well, like I say, this is actually in England, but in most places I work, but we have no budget, we get all creative. This is that same zoo system with the cloudies, and this is the other species that they're world renowned for successfully breeding. Okay, this is one of my favorite. It's bad video, and I'm sorry about that, but it's really nice, small cat. If you think about it, they're using the same muscles and talents that they use to run down prey. This is just this log is on a bungee. I think this was just the first or second time we had access to it. And the meat is placed in there so it pops right out. You know, you start easy. And then after a few weeks, he's gotten so good they really jam those leg bones in there. Okay, so now he's really working together. This is the same cat. So how do they clean that? Well, first of all, they did a really good thing by putting the holes horizontal. Everybody, when they do feeder logs, they always do like this because they want the food to stay in. But that just keeps all the gunk and the rain in there. So that's pretty bad. So I tell people to either drill them all the way through, okay, or drill them horizontally. And you can just spray hose it. And, you know, it's a log you're replacing, it's not. That's England, they have logs, it's not like California. Okay, is Leslie right in here? I was thinking about this after we talked about the hyena social group that we have. So these guys are cooperative hunters. And this is designed, and I'll show it again. but they can't reach their meat, so it's a reverse zip line. So they actually have to grab the fire hose and drag it uphill till they can reach it, but somebody has to hold it or else it'll go back downhill. Okay, so they have to hold it and pull it down, and then everybody gets to eat it. So one of this is really, really nice because it's, come on, how do I go back? Because it's, not only is it, you know, keeping them busy and active, but it's also increasing their social bonding. So they're working together as a group. Okay, really, I should turn the sound on if I know how to do that on your computer because it's really, they're wild dogs, so they're awesome, right?
It's on notes, yeah.
Yeah, there you go. But it's like really loud most of the time. Okay, so just Chris, one of our other instructors, sort of put together this process, okay, of just to explain how this all goes and why we like this concept of really looking at inside the animal. So you do have this chart in your thing, so don't worry about it. It's printed in your handout. So what we're going to do is every single process we do, whether it's training or enrichment or problem solving, it starts with you understanding the animal. Okay, I asked somebody earlier, how does this animal make a living, you know, get their food in the wild, and a specific question, and they actually didn't know. You know, which is understandable. We all work with a lot of species and everything. But in whatever time you have, the first thing you should be doing is systematically going through the animals that you take care of and just reading about them and learning how they behave in the wild. Because these guys have evolved under certain conditions to interact with the environment in certain ways. We really need to understand what they're programmed for so that we can stimulate that in captivity. Okay. So we're going to select a behavior. We want to focus on behavior because that's what we do. We're going to select a behavior. In this case, we're going to select increasing physical activity for their health and fitness. And we're going to specifically target a pole feeding device. Okay, and if you don't know what that is, some of you have seen this video before, it's this. And this is how we really like to see big cats there. In slow motion, of course. Chris gets really, has fun with his videos. This is another one that, when he started doing this, some of these lines had really flabby butts, but they are all pretty buff right now. This is another one you really have to look at your fencing.
How do the keepers put the meat up on top?
Rope system. Okay. So now that we all know what that is, by doing that, we're going to develop muscle. Okay. And from that, we're going to increase the strength, their balance, and their coordination. Okay. We're also enhancing the bone structure. And that means not only are they stronger because now they have the bones with the density and the attachment points and stuff to maintain musculature, but they also have that better, more healthy, and more bone marrow. Right? And what comes from bone marrow? We're going to be enhancing the blood system, and that means better immunity. And I was quite stunned about 10 years ago, maybe now, Margaret can probably tell you, they started coming out with some really, really nice research projects in primates that showed that animals that lived in enriched environments were warding off disease better, their immune systems were functioning better. And there's a lot of those studies now, but I think they're mostly in primates. We're also enhancing the heart and lung system by increasing their stamina and their general health. They're less fat, as a rule, which in this country is a big zoo animal problem, right? In a lot of the countries I work in, not. It's the other way. Every one of these things, is all the green things are what we're developing, and the benefits are in the brown. Every one of those things is not supposition. Every single one of those things has been done with rigorous study and shown to be fact. Okay? This is the only one that's not. We assume that because of all that, they live longer, healthier lives. Okay? But I'm not exactly sure how we can research that. Okay? So what happens when that gets to be too easy for him? Try something different, raise the food up higher, make it harder to pull down, put it on a movable thing so you can, go fishing for tigers or whatever. There's a lot of, you change it up. Right? Just like in enrichment, when they get good at it and it's no longer taking them a long time to get the fluid out of that ball, then you have to redesign the ball feeder to make it better. So just like with the non-food one, I want to give you a real life example. This was in Indonesia, and I can only say that now because it has a happy ending. Well, the first time I was there in 2009, they had just about 3 weeks earlier put in this pole. You can still see the concrete down there. And they actually do have a pole set up where they can pull the food up so the tiger follows the food up high. But she was extraordinarily reluctant to actually do this, and the male wouldn't do it at all. And they're supposed to do it 3 times a day, every day for the visitors. So they came to me and said, how can we get them to do this reliably? And I said, okay, let's have a look. And here's what they showed me. They had long talks about motivation, by the way. Oh, Margaret, the video is terrible. Just watch how she lands. This is one that we, okay, right down to the ground. Cats shouldn't be doing that. Okay, they should be catching themselves and pushing off before she hits her sternum. And it's concrete to boot, right? I just looked at that and went, oh my God, it's not. I can't believe she hasn't already broken a rib or a hip or an neck or a leg or something. So this to me is a really great example of you see that sexy video and you want to go and just give it to your animals, but you can't. You've got to assess what their ability is and work within that and get her there over time. Okay? And remember, building up skeleton takes a long time. All right? So we have every 7 to 9 years, the human body completely replaces its skeleton. Every bone cell in your body was not there more than 9 years ago. Okay? So if you're a couch potato and you're replacing your bone structure, okay, over a course of years, you're probably not doing quite the same density. You're probably not building quite the same size for muscle attachments and all those things. So when you take these animals that have lived their whole life in a zoo and never been physically challenged, I don't know how long it's going to take to get them up enough that they can do this task well. Okay. Okay, so we sat down right away and we said, we're going to gradually build up their muscles by not raising the meat so high. Okay, so just where it is now, it's going to stay there. In fact, you'll see she shoots past it because she's anticipating it going up. Okay, and then we're going to pad the landing so that she's not landing on concrete. Okay, but how was that landing? Yeah, she was fine. That she can do, all right? And that's pretty much all she could do. You can play around with it a little bit to look, but that was where she needed to start at. And so they sat down and they said, okay, we're going to do it. It's successive approximations, right? We're going to do it this way until we feel that she's ready to move it up a couple of feet. By, accident, whatever, I just happened to be invited back there 4 years later for a conference. And before the hotel was on the zoo grounds, and before I even got checked in, when the radio call went through the day I got in there, the tiger keepers ran up and got me out of the hotel lobby. And of course, none of them speak English, right? Well, and so they're just grabbing me and pulling me away, and the hotel staff are freaking out. And I'm like, it's okay, I know these guys, relax, And they wanted, before I got to check in the hotel, they wanted to show me this. And this is the same tiger, the same female, the same individual. Look at that muscle. Look at her. And look at her claws dug in. But look at her forearms and her quads. I mean, that's fantastic. And watch how she goes down. You saw those other lions and tigers that get down to about 1 body length above or 2 and drop. Look at her, she's so strong, she just climbs all the way down. She didn't have to drop. Isn't that amazing? So, this stuff works. It really does. I don't know how much of those 4 years it took to get her to that point. I don't know if they went too slow, if they went too fast, because I wasn't there. okay? But within 4 years, what a huge difference, okay? So I just want to say that I really think if we stop looking at just sort of the simple, oh, he's moving around, to what exactly is he doing moving around? Leslie and I were talking this morning about giraffes eating browse, okay? There's eating browse, and then there's eating acacia browse. They're very different things from the giraffe standpoint, if you think about what's going on with the tongue, okay? So really start kind of thinking, so I mean, I don't know, maybe micro behavior is the way to say that. Really start thinking about what's really going on with these guys and what kind of challenges you're giving them with your enrichment. And we would love, as you guys accept our challenges, and come up with some things to really enhance this, we would love for you to share it with us. We've gone to it edited blog format. Our website's kind of screwed up right now, but it'll get fixed. And we do. We go to a lot of countries, so it's a great place to share ideas. One of the things I usually do in the beginning, and I hadn't done this time, so we just tossed it in at the end, is this picture. I like this picture a lot because this mantis looks like she's cheerleading for welfare, right? Woohoo! You know, the arms are thrust up. She's big. She's pushed up high. You know, thrust up like this. With a big old smile on her face. Okay, and that's what most people, you guys may know better, but that's what most of the people who I show this picture for, even zoo people, see. And everybody gets excited, yay, welfare. Okay, but does anybody know what's really going on here? Yeah, it's a threat. It's the very last threat that you see before attack, right? So rather than being the cheerleader for welfare, what do you think her welfare is right now? Probably not so good. I think it's pretty easy to understand that when you're about to be, oh, what you can't see is there's a beagle just off camera about to, cut out, about to eat her. Okay, a beagle. Okay. So if you're looking at this giant mouth coming down on you and displaying this behavior trying to scare it off, I think it's pretty easy to say that we probably think her welfare is not so high right now. And this point goes back to what I said when we started that chart. You have to know the animal. You have to know the species, and you have to know the individual, okay? Before you can really start making judgments on what's going on in that animal's welfare. Okay? Okay. And since you like bobcats so much, this is a little guy who would hang out in the tree by my house in January. I love bobcats where I live now. I love it. I'm loving it. So, are we good? Everybody okay? Any questions on that?
Well, I'm sorry to tell you, it's back to the complex. Val gets to do the fun stuff,
Oh,
I have
stop
to
it.
do the academic stuff.
See, that's what I get for not going to much school as you.
Maria told me I was too boring.
Okay, make sure you come to the data collection lecture.
Which, I was thinking about that, like, damn it, God, data collection lecture.
That's the most boring one. Are you kidding? I have to jump up and down and yell at you people again.
It's taking a really long time to say this.
Don't save it.
Oh, I did, it's too late. Where were we yesterday? We talked about 5-3.
Yes. I'm not sharing this down.
Yeah, we ended at the, like, stretch points.
Before we get started, let's hand out the bear fleet before I forget. The fleet of bears. Sorry, these are files on it from Margaret, so she is.
Yeah, and so.
So everybody's getting a thumb drive that's an adorable bear. And what you life form that we'll be doing as an activity in just a few minutes. And then you also have some additional workshop materials, some of the charts that you've seen up on the slides, I already said the outline, I think. And then a bunch of documents from WASA, from AZA, and for those of you that don't carry it around in your back pocket, the USDA Blue Book bit on animal welfare. And then there's another folder that has just a bunch of articles. And they were just some that we grabbed. Certainly it's not a comprehensive, here's all the articles on welfare, but just a few of them that were kind of jumped out. So that's what you have. If you are in this workshop, you are now blessed with the adorable bear thumb drive. Please don't lose it. Keep it with you. We're going to need you to bring it back. Remember, all of these lectures and activities build on each other. So we'll need you to bring that back because hopefully your bribe, flat out bribe and incentive to come back for more fun is we'll give you even more stuff on your thumb drive. So just bring it back for each, if you can bring it back on day one of each week that we're doing this, then we'll load it up for you with the next set of stuff. So that way you're not overwhelmed by seeing everything at once, and that just makes it sound nice for you, but really it's because maybe we don't have everything together to put on there just yet. It's not because we're procrastinating, it's because we're getting the most up-to-date information. Right?
That sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, and
so
if it matters to you that you get the exact same one back, then I would put your name on it somehow.
Excellent.
Marcus, that's fine.
Okay, so because we only have a few minutes before we get into the activity, first off, how many of you have heard of the 5 freedoms?
Oh, thank God.
Pretty much everybody. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time then talking about it. These are what they are. You have the information in your notebooks. Where are you going?
And every one of those should scream enrichment at you, by the way. Just saying. Just saying.
You didn't use this, do you? There we go.
I had that problem, so I just took an handed it.
It wasn't plugged in.
Oh,
Yeah, I know. Okay, so I'm not going to go over all of these other than just sort of to point out that the 5 freedoms are really outcome-based. We want to make sure that animals have freedom from all of these things. The other thing that I want to point out about the 5 freedoms is there's been some criticism because a simplified thought might be, oh, well, an animal can never be hungry or thirsty if it's freedom from hunger or thirst. And that's not the intent. The animal isn't supposed to walk around super replete all the time because they're now free from hunger. No, we want them to go through a normal pattern just like we do, where we get hungry, we're motivated to behave in a normal species appropriate way by hunger or some other stimulus in the environment, and then we have the opportunity to respond in a way that alleviates that feeling of hunger or thirst or whatever it might be. So it's not that these things are always absent from the animal's environment, it's that they have the opportunity to feel this motivation to eat, engage in normal behaviors to obtain that food, and therefore they're not hungry or thirsty or whatever it might be. Okay, so just keep that in mind because that has been a criticism. So how many of you are familiar with the 5 domains? A couple of people. That's pretty good. Okay, so the 5 domains is a more updated way of looking at and assessing animal welfare. And the 5 domains uses these first 4 physical or functional domains, and we look at how the physical environment and everything that goes with that, be it management practices or anything else, how those things affect the emotional environment or the mental environment, if you will, so the mental state. So it's a little bit different than the animal's not hungry, the animal's not thirsty, the animal's not terribly frightened or in some other situation that the 5 freedoms would suggest. So the 5 domains is a little bit different way of looking at it, and I realize this is hard to read, especially for everybody in the back. That's why you have it on your flash drive. But essentially, we see nutrition, environment, health, and behavior, and those are those physical domains that we look at to then assess the mental state. So we have negative and positive experiences in each of these domains. For nutrition, restricted water and food, poor food quality, things like that. Positive, enough water and food. So you can read that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time reading this to you because we don't really have a lot of time and you're capable of reading it yourself. But I just want you to understand kind of how the domains are laid out. And essentially we're looking at these physical things and then how they affect the animal's mental or emotional state. So that's something that really is missing from the 5 freedoms, is that mental state. And again, there are some advantages and disadvantages that are associated with the 5 domains. And if after you look over this stuff, I think it might be, if you're trying to use this to kind of help you assess an animal's welfare, then maybe it's something that we could have further discussion on. I think it's important that everybody has at least a rudimentary understanding of the 5 freedoms and the 5 domains. You don't have to be an expert in it. I'm certainly not an expert in it, but you read some of the pros and cons and the articles that are counter and whatever you call it, counter, whatever it's called, counter and counterpoint, about the 5 domains and the 5 freedoms, and I think it really helps you have a much broader understanding, and also enables you to go out and have an intelligent conversation with your colleagues if you're at a conference or a workshop, and you're understanding these things. And I think if we want to be good at welfare, we need to understand the literature and what's being talked about. So that I'm just going to kind of leave it at that. And really I want to move on to our activity and the notion of quality of life, or QOL. So quality of life recognizes that animals have both positive and negative experiences, and the quality of life looks at the balance of those experiences. So animal welfare is almost a state. You're in a state of animal welfare. Quality of life is more your overall experience. And there's been a 5-tiered approach that we can think about. A good life, and notice all of these start off with the balance of positive and negative experiences. So a good life is where the balance is more towards the positive experiences and fewer negative experiences. And a life worth living, the balance is still favorable. And then we have the point of balance, where you're pretty well positive and negative about equal out. And then we begin to slip into the more negative experiences, a life worth avoiding, and a life not worth living, where there's an overwhelming amount of negative experiences that individual is living with. So think about, again, quality of life as sort of those categories, if you will. And things to think about with quality of life and considerations. Some of the interventions that we need to do as we're caring for and managing animals may have some negative consequences. Can you think of any that might have a negative consequence to an animal?
Having to catch them up daily to give them injections if they're sick.
Yeah, an animal's sick, it needs an antibiotic shot, and it's not trained for daily injections, so we have to catch it up. It's for the animal's physical health, but probably a pretty negative experience for that animal. It didn't get the memo and see the medical report that, hey, this will make you better later. Okay? So there are things that absolutely we have to do, and that's a perfect and I think really straightforward example. So we want to think about the negative experiences and the costs and benefits of those. And as we're thinking about this life worth living or a life worth avoiding or that point of balance, do the positive experiences balance out the negative? Well, it's okay that we did this because this is good. Yeah, I would agree. I see Amber shaking her head no. That fluffy hair going, girl. So, we don't want to just step back and use that as an excuse. Like, oh, okay, well, it's okay because we balanced it out. We did some good things to counter the bad things. I think we always want to look at what other accommodations or adjustments can we make to not only balance, but even up the positive experiences and minimize the negative experiences. So don't just say, check, there's balance, it's okay, I did one bad thing and one good thing today. So we always want to think on
We
that.
don't always know whether or not it's going to be worthwhile. You know, if the injection or whatever the medical treatment is going to work to, you know, promote a better life, or whether introducing animals or moving animals is going to ultimately improve their social situation.
So even another.
If you're able to see into the future, you might be able to answer that.
Yeah,
Or
so
read
the
their
things that we think
minds.
we're doing that are positive may not actually be.
Yeah, or if they'd talk to us.
Yeah.
They are, right not.
What about something that's positive, like in Scandinavia, their birds is teaching, and so like feeding would usually be a positive thing, and all the other birds find it pretty positive, but for one bird, when we're walking around in the enclosure, having to feed everybody, that's extremely negative for her, so like it helps everyone else, because they're like, yay, food, but she's like, holy cow, there's all these people in here.
So there we get back to looking at that individual and how our management activities are affecting a particular individual. So then we want to weigh, okay, we know we have to feed everybody, that's important, right? But look at how our management practices are impacting this one individual. And although there may be 30 over here that are fine with it, that one individual's welfare is now perhaps compromised, and we want to think up a new strategy rather than saying it's just okay because we got to take care of those 30. Maybe there's another way to do it to reduce the impact on that one individual, because this is about the individual.
Also, that positive thing that comes later doesn't necessarily relate in their mind to that negative. Training, you know, you can stick them with a needle, but they get that automatic reward afterwards in the bridge. But in everyday life, they don't always associate that positive with the negative, so it doesn't actually cancel it out.
Yeah, excellent point, yeah. Let's see, the conclusion as well. Oh, and this is just, again, another quote that I like. The conclusion as to whether or not the life of an animal is worth living is something that we humans will make on behalf of the animal, based on how we think it feels, I think, which is kind of gets back to what Colleen was saying as well, when experiencing a physical and social environment largely dictated by us. So again, you know, we're trying to project how we think that animal feels, but we really can't do that. We need to use everything in our power to assess the animal's behavior and really look at what they're experiencing. Okay, so when we want to determine an animal's welfare, we can look at parameters like longevity, reproduction, behavior, those sorts of things. But many of these are not standalone. Just because an animal lives a long life or reproduces doesn't mean it's living a life worth living. But, yeah. So it's important, I think, to look for these things, perhaps more important to look for the absence of these things. If animals are living very short lives or they're not reproducing, perhaps those are red flags that we look at. That just because they're living a long life doesn't mean it's a great life.
And Margaret showed yesterday the video of the hyenas doing the stereotypic, you remember that? When we talked to the vet and the owner, and we said, you know, this is a behavior that it's pretty bad and it should cause you a little bit of concern for the animal's welfare. And they said, no, didn't you see the pup? And we went, yeah, you know, they have a youngster in
18
there.
in that little box.
And they said, no, it's breeding, it's fine, they're fine, their welfare's good. And I run into this all the time, and so they literally felt no need to do anything to change there in that really ridiculously sterile enclosure you saw with that horrifically behaving animals, because they had pups, so they're fine, we know that to be a fact.
Can I ask you, I mean, were you invited there to advise and they
Yes.
didn't want to hear your advice?
I don't go places I'm not invited, life's too short.
Right. And is that where it ended with them?
But we just make them sorry they invited us.
Actually, no, Margaret did some pretty fancy schmancy stuff, you know, embroidering with elephants there that pretty much impressed them. No, we did some good giraffe stuff too. And so they started to rethink that. Yeah.
But it was a one-time.
It was a one-off, we haven't been back, so I don't know.
Anyway, so of course another thing that we want to look for, and we talked a lot about this yesterday, is the presence of abnormal behaviors and what those really might mean for the animal. So those should always be a red flag for us, and then we need to dig a little deeper to see how it's we think it's impacting the animal's welfare. Do the animals have the ability to cope to with changes in their environment, or does it send them into a catatonic state if you throw a new enrichment item in, whatever it might be? So we want to look at this, how an animal deals with novelty. In similar vein, are they engaging in investigatory behaviors, approach-oriented types of behaviors, or do they shy away from these sorts of things? And performance-oriented behaviors, really, can an animal do something to achieve an objective? Would they be successful in the wild? You know, can they find their own food? Can they behave in a species-appropriate way? I mean, ultimately, the question comes down to, could they survive? So, as we look at questions that we want to ask and how we're going to determine welfare and quality of life, you know we have these 5 freedoms and 5 domains that we can help as guiding tools. Does the animal have an appropriate environment? Can it locomote and move and behave in a normal way? So, you know, the first question is, does it have the opportunity? The second question is, does it do it? Does it take advantage of that opportunity? Pretty rudimentary, but you know, we think about birds that are pinioned or animals that are in an enclosure that's quite small. Maybe they don't have the opportunity to reach an acceleration of their full potential for speed. So can a bird fly, you know, a big circle? I think I showed y'all in one of the other presentations that aviary at the Seoul Zoo in Korea with the cranes flying around. That was super cool. You know, that's a big enclosure that provides a big bird like that the opportunity to fly. Of course, you know, we do want to look for those observable features that I just mentioned, and then we want to look at the psychological well-being of the animals. So this is just a bit of a quick summary of questions that you can ask yourself. And I think ultimately, you know, we want to know, are the animals challenged in their environment? Do they have the motivation to behave and normally and be engaged in a species-appropriate way? Do they have what they need? What they need is very different than what they want. They need things to survive. They want things to have good welfare. Okay, so we need to look at both of those things. And you know, ultimately, are they happy? And it's okay to ask, are they happy? We don't have to be scientific and always say they're behaving in a species-appropriate way, and we can check off all these behaviors. I mean, that's important, but what it comes down to is, do they have what they want, do they have what they need, and are they happy? And I think if we can answer yes to these things, then we're doing, you know, a pretty good job. But that doesn't mean that we should stop trying and stop examining. And that's kind of exactly what the quality of life exercise that we're going to do is all about. I think most of us think of quality of life as something we do as we ponder the possible end of an animal's life. But quality of life is really something that we should be assessing throughout the animal's life. Because just because we can answer those questions, do they have what they want, do they have what they need, are they happy, that shouldn't mean we turn our backs on the process. You know, we should always be looking for ways to improve that animal's quality of life.